Hello, I'm Neil Francis. You'll hear a lot of so-called slippery slope misinformation from opponents of dying with dignity law reform. Here are just 3 examples. Firstly, on his campaign website, Mr. Paul Russell says, in Oregon, following the introduction of doctor-assisted suicide, suicide by other methods went up and not down as predicted. This is consistent with suicide contagion or clusters, but Mr. Russell's claim flies in the face of the official Oregon government figures. Comparing the general population suicide rate of 12 years prior with 12 years after their Dying with Dignity Act came into effect, there is a slight but significant drop, not rise, in the suicide rate. Mr. Russell can't claim ignorance of the facts either. I pointed out the falsehood of this claim in a public debate with him 2 years ago. Yet this nonsense still appears masquerading as fact on his website today. Secondly, when a previous Dying with Dignity bill had been before the South Australian Parliament in 2010, Nicholas Tonti Filippini of the John Paul II Institute in Melbourne wrote to members in opposition of the bill. It is distressing to note that 2/3 of people who use assisted dying laws, he wrote, in those jurisdictions that permit it, are women. His claim directly contradicts published international peer-reviewed research, which shows that supposed vulnerable groups, including women, aren't vulnerable. In fact, the robust data from Oregon, Belgium, and the Netherlands show clearly that women represent slightly under half, not 2/3, of those who use assisted dying laws. Thirdly, you may have heard that former Health Minister Els Borst regrets bringing in the Dutch voluntary euthanasia law. This is a misrepresentation of many, including anti-euthanasia campaigner Margaret Somerville.
The minister who was responsible for shepherding through the legislation that legalised euthanasia in the Netherlands admitted publicly that doing so had been a serious mistake.
This is despite the fact that Ms. Borst has clearly and repeatedly stated she remains proud of the reform. I showed Somerville's claim directly to Ms. Borst, who reaffirmed that she was pleased with the Act, but was not pleased to be entirely misrepresented yet again.
I know that story. I'd like to meet this Margaret, what's her name?
Margaret Somerville.
Maybe she wouldn't listen anyway.
And this claim was also made by Dennis Hood in a speech on the floor of the Legislative Council as grounds for rejecting a previous Dying with Dignity bill. So what can we learn from lawful jurisdictions? The Honourable Ken Smith, Speaker of the Victorian Parliament, and I visited Oregon and spoke with legislators, clinicians, researchers and others. Professor Linda Ganzini, one of the most respected end-of-life researchers and a psychiatrist at the Oregon Health and Sciences University Hospital, who is neutral to their Death with Dignity Act, outlined careful, published scientific research.
The idea that people would come from outside of Oregon to access the law, the idea that these would be vulnerable and disenfranchised people who would make the choices, that it would be because they could not get good treatment for their pain or their symptoms, those haven't been true.
Ms. Ann Jackson, who was Executive Director of the Oregon Hospice Association for 10 years prior to and 10 years after the Death with Dignity Act came into effect, and who was also neutral to it, shared the insider practitioner's view.
And it was predicted that thousands would use it every year. We were the only organization who was accurate. We have the experience. The sky didn't fall.
Oregon Senator Jenny Burdick confirmed,
the law has worked beautifully. All of the scare stories were just that. They were scare stories based on nothing. And none of the terrible things that they predicted, that the opponents predicted, has ever come to pass.
Former Oregon Governor Barbara Roberts adds,
I believe strongly that what we can talk about, we can make better. And I don't think anything is much more clear about this law than that happening in Oregon. Oregon has proven what happens when you make the law and the compassion come together.
So regardless of the number of times that opponents invoke so-called slippery slope effects, They simply just haven't materialised. It's no wonder that 3 doctors in Oregon, still very strongly opposed to their Death with Dignity Act, admitted to the Victorian Parliament Speaker and me.
Now what we're saying is it exists, the slippery slope. And can we prove cause and effect? Of course not. And we can't show cause and effect. That's not what we're claiming.
I urge you to cast aside the misinformation that opponents put to you as facts and give the Ending Life with Dignity Bill your support. Thanks for watching.